Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. I'm Chris. Today, we're going to have a look at another DIY project. I'm going to go over this camera here, the Century Graphic, with an adapter that allows me to shoot with my Aptus 22 digital back, making this a digital Century Graphic 2.3. I do want to state this adapter was designed by yours truly, and we'll get into some of the technical challenges that I had with making it. Let's get into it. What is the Century Graphic 2.3? Well, it's a camera made by Graflex from 1949 to 1970. It normally shoots a film of the 2¼ by 3¼ sheet film variety, but it can also take a 6:9 medium format 120 roll film using its modular back system. The camera body is made from something called a mahoganite. That's basically plastic. And it features the widely used Graflock back system that allows you to switch your types of film that you're shooting. And my particular one is a fairly base variant. As you can see, there's not super fancy things that are on here. There's no coupled rangefinder. I do, however, have a press type wireframe finder, which will pop up here. Wow, look at that. Now I can aim and generally frame things. And I have a OVF that is parallax corrected. As you can see, I can adjust the distance there and it should adjust some stuff. Ooh, awesome. Now, this camera also features some limited tilts and shifts as well. Let's show you the shifts. Wow, look at that. And overall, it's a fairly compact medium format press camera. My specific Century Graphic, you could probably tell it's been a bit tinkered with. First, let's look at the front. You might have noticed that this is not the standard lens board, and that's correct. This is using a 3D printed lens board, and it's holding a Ektar 101mm f4.5 lens. Now, I had to do this because the original lens that my particular one came with was a lens that didn't have X-Sync, and I'll explain why that's important in a bit. But in the back, you can see it's also equipped with the adapter that allows me to shoot my Aptus 22. That's this over here. And if you haven't seen the review of the Aptus 22, I'll put a link to that below, just in case you are wondering what I think about that digital back in general. Now, this overall adapter thing is a combination of 3D printed bits as well as fabricated metal bits. As you can see, there are chopped or worked sheet metal there that allow me to clip the back into the adapter. I did initially have a 3D model for a plastic variant, however, that was super dicey, and I don't think it would have supported the weight of a digital back. I also didn't really want to find out and put my digital back on there just to have it snap. So yeah, I just made one out of sheet metal instead. So if we have a look at the camera profile again, you can see that the adapter that I'm using makes the digital back sit further back than normal. Now, I had to do this because the digital back otherwise wouldn't clear the actual Graflock back system, so I had to set the parts of the digital back like system further back to clear these tabs here, which I'm not sure if you can see them, but that's why the whole thing is offset a little further back than it should be. It sounds like it'd be a big deal, but it actually isn't, since this is a press camera with a lens board on rails. You can generally adjust the default position of the lens board however you require by just changing the locking position of your of the lens board on the rails, and they're actually over here. Let's see if I can show you. It's where my finger is. There's a little metal tab there. I'll flick it up, but that is basically to help guide your lens board to its default position, and you can adjust these on the camera, so it's not a big deal to just figure out where the new default is and then just work from there. Now, this does, however, mean that since it is, again, further back, the normal supplied ground glass doesn't work since it's in a different plane than the digital back. However, that's not the end of the world as well, since I just basically made a new ground glass with some 3D printing and a bit of acrylic. I roughly set the ground glass holder back to where I thought the digital sensor was, and then basically tinkered with the position of the acrylic ground glass until I had it spot on with the actual position of the digital back. I'll show you what that ground glass looks like. This is the pack, and as you can see, there is a slightly frosted piece of glass, well, acrylic, and it is offset to match the position of the digital back. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but all of this basically amounts to a relatively compact digital medium format setup. It just happens to be very, very slow to use. So why do this? Why, in general, would I bother making a digital system like this? Well, you might have guessed that if you've seen my other Aptus videos or my other DIY projects, that I do kind of like the slowness of older camera systems. However, I no longer enjoy the expense of shooting film. I also don't enjoy the relatively long wait time in my area for 120 film, and I don't normally process my own film anymore. I've never processed C41, I only ever processed the black and white, and even at this point I no longer have any chemicals, and I still have tanks, but I just don't really want to do it. So understanding all of that makes a lot of sense for me in particular to just want to put a digital back on a medium format camera just to, play around with it. Now, I understand that the old digital back that I'm putting on here isn't even a full 645 camera, and to put it on a 6x9 camera is a hell of a crop. But for me, it's enough to, just justify taking the camera out to shoot it. Prior to using this adapter, the last time I actually put a roll of film through this camera, I think was in about 2011 or thereabouts. So this project got me interested in shooting these old cameras again. And I think really that's about it. That's why I do it. Caveats of doing a build like this. So if you're like me and you don't have infinite money for a digital back that has live view, a ground glass is a must. Luckily, making a ground glass isn't actually super difficult. It's actually kind of easy. You don't have to actually use glass to do it. I've done it before, and I actually don't think I'd recommend it. And mainly it's because I personally do not like cutting glass, and the extra effort needed to actually grind / polish or, scratch up the glass is, just a bit of a pain. So I recommend using a sheet of acrylic. I know it is technically worse for light transmission, and I know an acrylic sheet does have some flex to it, but I generally find that mine is flat enough. I don't think there's any bowing or bending in this particular ground glass. And again, I don't find that, the tiny difference in light transmission makes a difference compared to other ground glasses that I have. And again, it's just way easier to work with. I can just, grab any old sandpaper, and I don't need to sit there and ground this forever. Relatively short amount of time of grounding will yield a usable ground glass compared to sitting there for much longer using glass. Now, the way to do this, of course, is you get your ground glass material, use some coarse sandpaper, and progressively move up. I think I went from 75 up to like 800. I don't know, you can do like finer grits, but I was personally fairly happy with the way that this turned out using just an 800 grit, so just doing that. The annoying thing after you make your ground glass is actually matching the distance from your, where your ground glass is to where your actual sensor is. In theory, I could have used a set of calipers and just taken the lens board off and measured the distance from the back of the mount to the actual sensor, but I was too afraid that I was going to damage the sensor with my calipers, so I did not do that. I roughly measured the distance with the digital back adapter, but not with the digital back on there, and I figured that just got me into the general ballpark of where I'd want it to be, and then I would basically set the camera, or try to set the ground glass to infinity based on what I thought was infinity. Took a photo on the digital back, and then finagled the focusing until I got it just at infinity. That being said, before I did any of that, when I had first set to infinity on the ground glass, I marked the camera with a bit of tape to see where I was on the focusing scale of the lens board rails. And then, once I took photos and I adjusted the focus with the digital back, I then marked the differences. I marked the difference in the distance from the perceived infinity focus to where it actually was on the digital back, and that's how much I had to offset my ground glass that I had to actually match what should be infinity. I then took that distance, popped the ground glass off this frame, because I initially just had it held on with just a little bit of hot glue, dabbed more hot glue on, set that distance, and then just pressed the ground glass with the calipers set to that offset distance, and then basically tried the test again with the new height of the ground glass, and did that a couple times till infinity was achieved. Once that was done, I basically had a ground glass that was generally in the right spot, and I could confidently go out and use this actual ground glass. So I know it sounds like a tedious process, and it kind of is, but it's not difficult, and it's not too bad, just a tiny bit time consuming. This next thing I want to talk about, it's not specifically a caveat to this particular build, but more a caveat to this type of press camera, and that's basically that if you're going to be using the ground glass to focus a lot, it basically means you're going to be taking the digital back on and off quite a lot in order to actually focus with your ground glass. Now, that does mean you're probably going to get, a bit of sensor dusties going on. And as I said before in an older video, I learned that it's actually not recommended to use blowers on these medium format sensors, but I personally still do, and I haven't found an issue with it, so I'm probably going to keep doing that, but it's something to consider if you are a bit squeamish about cleaning the digital back. Another thing, again, not specific to this build, but specific to this type of camera, is that, when you're focusing with the ground glass, I always find that if I don't use a loop, like it's quite hard to nail the focus. So I got used to just carrying one with me and just duck and grab it. Here's the one that I use. Whoa. And it is very convenient because I can just put this directly on top of the ground glass like so, and that's already at its focal point. So I just shuffle this around and look in the frame where I gotta focus, and normally that works out fairly well. When I tried to shoot without it, it was quite a struggle just to get anything like in a reasonable focus. So keep that in mind. Now, the next thing you're probably wondering, maybe, is how do you trigger a digital back with a system like this? Well, this system is even older than the Mamiya press camera that I made digital, but honestly, it's not that hard as long as you have the right lens. Initially, as I said before, my Century Graphic 23 came with a lens that did not support X-Sync. It only supported the older, slower M-Sync, and these don't really work as they are set up to trigger the shutter at the peak of the M speed flashes, which is about 20 milliseconds after the flash is lit, which means that if you try to trigger a lens with M-Sync on a digital back, it will not work. Everything will be slightly delayed and it's just not gonna work out. X-Sync, however, has no such delay. This is the modern sync standard. But just a fun tidbit of knowledge there, X initially stood for xenon, as xenon flashes had no delay as to when was the peak of their light for, the triggering of the flashes. So X-Sync flashes just trigger at basically 0 millisecond delays. As a result, I ended up actually buying another press camera that happened to have an Ektar lens on it with X-Sync. That's what you see here. However, the lens board on that Ektar was not one that actually fit on my Century Graphic, so I had to 3D print one to mount it. Now, another problem with these older lenses a lot of the times is that they don't use a standard PC sync connector for the flash sync. Mine, as you probably noticed, used a weird set of prongs. And I'll unplug them so you can see it. That's what they look like there. And it's kind of hard to get cables for these, or at least I wasn't able to find any locally. I'm sure you could probably find some at a yard sale somewhere. But in the end, I basically took apart an old PC fan connector and soldered it to a 3.5 millimeter cable to actually connect to my Aptus 22 and, plug it into the lens board. And it's fairly easy enough. It works fairly well. Triggers every time, almost. And another nice thing is with the camera here, you can see it's kind of a space here underneath the rails. So when I'm packing this camera away, really, I can unplug the cord and stow it underneath the rails. I just have to make sure it doesn't pinch on any of the segments of the rails, but you can see the cord is tucked away in there, and I can fold the camera up and close it with the cord in there. So it's quite convenient. It's got its own little hidey hole. Now, all this stuff actually gets much easier if you happen to have a modern digital back with live view, as you won't need to take the back off to do any focusing. All you got to do is set your digital back to live view on, and then actually rack the rails back and forth till you actually get it in focus. Then you don't need to maneuver the ground glass, the sensor, and all that stuff. But alas, I do not have one of these backs. I do want one though, although they are quite expensive. So I don't know, if you like the channel, feel free to, do a sub, give a like, keep watching. If you really want, do a super thanks or whatnot. And maybe one day I'll be able to buy one to review it on this channel. Anyways, shameless plug over. Now, I do want to say that I do realize some of you might be saying, hey, you have a GFX 50S. Why not just jam that on the back of this camera and then use that instead of the Aptus 22? You'd have live view and, you'd be able to still take medium format-ish photos on the Century Graphic 2 III. Well, I could do that. However, I would have to actually offset the adapter even more, since in order to mount the camera behind here, it would need to clear the camera, like the Century Graphics itself, and I'd probably want to place it in the center of where the frame is. So I would have to, just have a look and see if I could model this so that it can clear this camera. I think that it can. It's probably just gonna be a tight fit, and I'll have to recess the lens even further back. It's kind of the only concern I have with that. That being said, I do have the mount for E-mount, so I can actually at least chonk a full frame camera on here and take pictures with that. However, that's even smaller. And I have done it for fun, just to see how it works. And it does work, but it feels somehow wackier to shoot with a camera like the A7, or the concept of putting the GFX on here just still feels weirder than doing a digital back. So I like the way that this form factor is, and even though it is slower to use, it's not the worst thing in the world. But if you do want me to try it with the GFX, let me know in the comments below, and maybe I'll do that in another video. Now, again, the last thing to consider for this type of project is, with these older digital backs, the workflow is very, very slow. It is basically only marginally faster than shooting with film. The only thing that is, again, really kind of saving you there is that the digital thing will save you more money than film in the long run, and you can check your focus immediately. Now, again, when shooting with this kit, this is just a reminder, or if it wasn't clear already, this is not really a hand-holdable kit. You really need a tripod and a comfortable spot to be in to shoot this thing. Most of the times when I have this camera set up, I'm like sitting on the ground or sitting on a bench. Really, I'm doing a lot of sitting as I shoot this thing, since I gotta like use a loop to check it, swap backs or swap the ground glass with the back, take a picture, verify it on the camera, and then adjust if it's off, and then repeat the process. It's slow. It's very slow. So keep that in mind. So how do you actually operate the digital Century Graphic 2 III? Let's go over this step by step. First, basically, when you have your camera set up, or before you have it set up, you should switch to the ground glass, and then set the Century Graphic on a tripod open up the camera itself, pull your lens board out to its position, lock it in, and then open the shutter. Now you have light going through the camera, and you should be able to see an image through the ground glass. Just keep in mind, it is also going to be an image that is upside down, since the light kind of inverts or whatnot. So keep that in mind when you're framing things up. So once you have that, you'll see the way your camera is framed, and you can have a seat or get comfortable, adjust your tripod till the framing is the way you like it, lock it in, and then adjust your focus via your loop. Now then, when you're done with confirming your focus, what you want to do is close that lens and take the ground glass off, swap your digital back in, plug in that sync cable to the lens and to the camera. Hit your shutter fire button, and that should do it. In essence, like I said, this camera requires a bit of planning. When I took this thing out, it was an event. The camera itself isn't hugely heavy though. The camera with the ground glass weigh about 2,200 grams, with the digital back. So that's basically about a little more than half a noct. So not a hugely heavy thing, but you have to just carry a lot of supporting equipment, right? So you got to pack your loop, you got to make sure the sensor is clean, maybe pack a blower, again, if you are willing to use one, and find a spot where you can set up a tripod and get comfortable. And you'll see that in some of my photos in the photo gallery, they are, I'm at Peggy's Cove in Nova Scotia, and you'll probably notice that a lot of the scene is very similar, and that is because I literally just picked a spot at Peggy's Cove, put my butt on the ground, set up all my stuff, and started shooting. I didn't really change my position that much, other than a couple shifts a bit, just to get a bit more comfortable, and then, just snapped, turned, reframed, and snapped some more. So, a lot of shots probably look a little bit samey, or, they looked like, they were from a fixed platform, which really they kind of were. But that's kind of the beauty of setting up with this thing. You're kind of forced to pick a spot and stick to it, less you want to get up and move around and redo this entire setup. I do also want to say that I have tried this in a standing position, and I tend to just end up hunching over with my loop, and I'm just looking around. It's not very comfortable, so don't recommend that. But overall, a fun experience. Now, the mod itself, it really did make using the Sentry graphic a lot more usable for me. And in the photos, you're probably going to notice that when I was using it, I didn't really activate any of the shifts or tilts. It doesn't have that many anyways, but I didn't really bother using it. I was just interested in seeing how the camera would perform in general with the digital back, and I was interested in just using the camera once again. And the mod really allowed me to do that and have a good time without worrying about, am I wasting film? Now, One of the real joys about using a digital back is also the fact that you can immediately see and readjust your photo after you take it. This is especially true for this camera as there's no built-in meter. So for the most part, I'm shooting broadly based on Sony 16 and trying to set things up that way and then adjust the exposure once I broadly get it to where I want it. And this would probably be a much tougher sell if I was using it on film. I'd probably want to pack an actual light meter and set it up perfectly the first time. So admittedly, I am shooting probably more frames than I should be, but honestly, I did find it just more pleasant to do it this way and set it up again with Sony 16, check it and adjust it rather than also packing a light meter, turning it on, and then trying to figure it out, or even loading up a light meter app on my phone. I was just more happy to, take the shot and have a look on the histogram with the back of the digital back. Now, again, this is probably an experience that is better suited if I had a modern digital back with a nicer screen that could, be easier to see in daylight. But again, don't got that. So, shoot with what you got. So let's quickly talk about the image quality of the Ektar 101mm f4.5. Simply, it's quite solid. It's very good. Now, I know the Ektar isn't the fastest lens by any means, but optically, it's pretty excellent. I mean, it was, after all, meant to resolve pretty good on 6x9, so, resolving on a smaller frame, basically, you crop in, you get same as with APS-C, you get the center, the juicy bits of the frame, and it honestly looks pretty good on the Aptus 22. I personally found the color rendition, even wide open, was really solid and improved when you stop down like f5.6, or if you had enough light, stop down to f8, it looked amazing. It just had a nice, punchy, saturated look, and the images do kind of pop out a bit more. So, really it's got pretty good like micro contrast, especially given how old the Ektar is. But, even shooting wide open, it wasn't bad. Like the contrast was a little worse, but it still had plenty of pop to it. Overall, love the lens. And with that, let's get into the photo gallery. So this project, it's been a lot of fun. Will this setup replace my normal medium format go-to setup? No, not really, not even close. But now, if I do ever feel like picking up a medium format camera, this one actually, it'll kind of bump up in the rankings, and I think I'll probably not wait another 13 years to pick the camera up again, since I now have a setup that'll allow me to more easily check that the photos coming out are looking all right. Additionally, now that I'm done this project, I am, well, not done. I had parts from before. Now that I've actually done the project and took it out to shoot, I have some other ideas what to do with the Century graphic. As I might have alluded to, this camera body kind of lends itself pretty well to DIY. I have some ideas that involve jamming other older lenses onto the Graflex and basically using the Graflex as a lens body, and then either jamming maybe even a roll of 120 on, or putting some other digital equipment on the back of there. Like I said, I already have the E-mount adapter. I even made one for Micro Four Thirds, so insane crop on these lenses. But it was fun to try. Maybe I'll do a quick demo of that one day. It's kind of hilarious. But let me know what are your thoughts on this digital Century graphics here, and what would you be interested in a setup like this, or do you think it's just a better idea to shoot film on these things? Do you have any questions on this particular build? And would you actually want me to put my A7 III or Olympus Micro Four Thirds camera on here and give it a shot? If so, let me know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Maybe a super like if you're into that. Otherwise, till next time, have a good one. Goodbye.